My name is David.
And my name is Jason.
And this is Discern Realities, a Dungeon World podcast. Our first segment is What Happened Here Recently?
So, listeners, we are joined by one of the runners-up in our recent Shrine contest. That runner-up is Daniel Fowler. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's weird to call you Daniel because we're so used to calling you Fowler. Listeners, Daniel is a longtime friend of us, of David and myself, and of the Gauntlet. We did not know that when we chose his entry to be one of the runners-up selections, and we certainly didn't know that when he was the winner of one of the other contests. What was the other contest that you won? You won the custom move contest, right?
Custom move with the upside down masters.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
We go way back with Daniel, and so we're excited to have him on. So I gather, Daniel, that you wanted to talk about having played with some new players recently. Is that right?
Yes. This isn't really like a complaining or, damn them for being not as good or I'm perfect or anything like that. It's just advice and how to deal with things.
Yeah, I've had some recent experience with some first-time Dungeon World players recently, too, so this is very timely.
Yeah.
That's funny because I actually have not. Interestingly enough, I've introduced so many people to Dungeon World over the years, but I would say in the last year or so, I haven't played with any people who've never played it or who don't have any experience with, say, Powered by the Apocalypse games. So I'm really interested to hear about this. I was going through your notes, Daniel, and it occurred to me, I was remembering, I was like, oh yeah, these are some things that people have a hard time with, but I haven't seen those things in so long myself. So, so what kinds of things are we talking about?
A lot of times it's leftover behavior from D&D or Pathfinder. Sometimes a lot of it is feelings of this isn't fair or the DM is out to get me. In Dungeon World, most of that is just abstracted into some move looks really powerful on paper, but it's good that character can do that thing that's very powerful, and you shouldn't stop the table and say, hey, wait, how come he gets to do that? You should be excited that he gets to do that, and you have to figure out what your thing is that you can do that is cool.
Yeah, that's so true. And there's some moves out there that seem like they might be quote-unquote game-breaking or overpowered or something, but it's like, really, you handle it with fictional positioning, and they're always going to have to roll dice, and bad things can happen when you roll dice.
Well, I think it's important to point out that it's not a competition. No one's winning the game, right? So when we talk about balance, you don't want to be the lame character, I guess, but it's just not an issue that every character has awesome things, Yeah,
you have on your notes here under this, talking about new players considering certain aspects of the gameplay unfair. You have one of your notes. How come you let them take 2 moves in a row?
Yeah.
That's something that comes up a lot, right?
Yeah.
Because they're used to the typical, like you said, the holdover initiative, my turn, your turn
When
thing.
do we roll for initiative? Isn't it my turn? No, we don't really have turns.
A lot of times I get stuck with a lot of players, and I generally do devolve into your turn, your turn, your turn, and I go around the table to try and make sure everyone gets a turn. But sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes the person I just look around really quickly. Okay, roll for that. And now I want to do something. Sure.
Yeah, often there's a natural follow-up, right? And it makes more sense to go ahead and just do that follow-up instead of doing another whole cycle through the table, right?
Yeah.
I always try to present it to players as, and mind you, like I said, it's been ages since I've played with brand new players, but I remember always trying to present it as a sort of more, I always try to go for a cinematic experience, right? If you think about it in terms, I always use the metaphor of watching a film. If you think about it in those terms, you can kind of explain to the player, okay, well, yeah, but in this little brief moment, we want him to spy that the orc has a dagger behind his back, and we want him to be able to do something about it right now, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense in the scene in the movie, right? We wouldn't like see him seeing that and then cut away and do a bunch of other stuff and then come back to the orc, plunging the dagger into him or him trying to stop. It's just, there's a beat, right? There's a narrative. It's a rhythm you get into, and it's kind of hard to explain to players, but I think one thing you can always kind of put out there for the player who does want to insist that certain things are unfair is, hey, every time the dice get rolled, there's a chance a 6- comes up. And when a 6- comes up, in my games at least, especially in a fight, you're fucked. So that's kind of the way I look at it.
One thing I often say to people is, pitch me an idea. Right? If you want to look cool, if you think something is interesting, pitch me the idea. I'll try to make it happen. If you think it's cool to, jump into the middle of 4 orcs and try to behead them all in one swing, sure, roll it. Consequences will be bad if it's bad.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's the great chance to explain golden opportunity to players, right? I mean, you can't just do anything, right? And just because a move is available doesn't mean you even get to roll it, right? Mm-hmm. If you do something just plainly stupid, right?
Yeah.
Just like the fiction just demands that you suffer. Why roll that, right? I think that's a really interesting technique to kind of say, pitch me an idea. I think that's a great way of handling it. I think it's particularly a good way of getting brand new Dungeon World players to begin thinking in these terms, to sort of pull away from the mechanics and pull away from the procedures and think about just fiction. Something I always do is I always like put the basic move sheet and the character sheet and stuff like down in front of the players. And then I say, don't worry about this, right? Like, don't even look at this. Don't even bother with this right now. It's here and we're going to refer to it when we need to. But for now, just think about what your character is doing, describe what your character is doing, and then show them how the moves trigger. I find anything you can do, like you just described, Daniel, and like I just described, of getting them to think in terms of the fiction first. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. And that also has a lot to do with our playstyle, where I don't think any of us play with like super immersive, where our characters must stay behind their characters' eyes the entire time, or our players must stay behind
players have to stay behind their eyes. Yeah.
Like we come in and out and we let them know the table knows this, but your characters don't. And like thinking about it in this terms of pitch me an idea, what is your character doing? That helps get them in the right, at least what I think is the best way of playing Dungeon World.
That collaborative spirit, that writer's room approach, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so what other sorts of things are we talking about here in terms of pitfalls with new players?
A lot of it has to do with success and failure, and like when I take over the narrative, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes the player resists this a lot. Sometimes it's not like one player fails a roll and there's an arrow buried in his chest now. And then second player looks up and says, hey, wait, can I rush and defend that guy? At that point, it's like, no, he's rolled the failure. He's gained the XP. It's time for the consequences and for the story to move on.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes the player wants to, especially when I've given them some narrative control, they want to change. It's like, okay, well, what if instead, I lost some adventuring gear or something like that? And at that point, it's like, these are the consequences I've set down. If you want to tell me like a more interesting way that they happen, that's great, but we're moving on.
Right, yeah. They're trying to bargain to change the outcome, and it's like, no, it's not. We're not doing that anymore. It's Or
they want to trigger another move to to make the thing happen. Right. That happened today in our game of Dungeon World. We had a character who was. We went through a whole process where they had, in order to kill some stuff that was inside the character, they had to like create this like sort of venom to put inside the character in order to kill the stuff in the character. Mm. And then we had a roll, and I decided, well, that character's dead now because the venom didn't just kill what was inside of him, it killed the character as well. And then we had kind of like a little retcon with antitoxin, right? Which I was okay with because they didn't necessarily know that the kid could die on the 6-, right? But But I guess it kind of depends. Like there's like a line there, I think, of like when you let them do a follow-up action, and I let them have a roll. I let them do a
you let it go to a roll.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I thought it was appropriately handled.
Yeah, I thought so too. That's not the same example of what Daniel's saying here, I think, but
right. Yeah, it's not like, hey, how about the kid's not dead, and instead, like, this happens. It was like...
Yeah, that's a totally different thing.
Like, we had to resuscitate the child.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, a lot of times, too, it's just a non-reaction, right? So, when the dice roll, good or bad, now this is happening, right? And sometimes the player... Like, he's been waiting for his turn, especially in a big table, right? They like, okay, this is what my plan to do on my turn when my turn comes up. And, then, the fiction has moved on and they're like, okay, now I want to do that thing. I'm like, okay, but, like that happened, it failed, and, someone else did that. And,
circumstances are changed. Yeah.
The whole room is collapsing. Are you sure you want to just stand there and do another attempt at this thing?
That kind of goes back to at the opening of what we said about people getting out of the rhythms of D&D play, right? Yeah. I mean, in D&D, you're often just like waiting on your turn, and your turn is usually all the turns that have happened before yours is usually just some form of I roll to hit the thing, right? There isn't a lot of like dynamic environmental things going on. The circumstances aren't drastically changing other than like the owlbear has fewer hit points now, right? And so I kind of get that I think that's another one of those like habit breaking things. It's really one of those things where you have to kind of, as the GM, you have to acknowledge it and be willing to draw out the good play from them. So like, instead of saying like, well, what do you do? What you might do when it's pretty clear that the player wasn't like, maybe they weren't paying close attention, or maybe they weren't seeing the movie in their head. Maybe you recap what just happened and then you ask them, how would you respond to that? Or when you saw the thief go careening over the cliff, what would you do? How would you react?
I do that. Yeah, I do that in particular with new players where the action has just happened, something has just happened, and then I immediately turn to the next player and I say, you see this happen, you see that happen. Like the two basically paths that are immediately before you. What do you do?
Yeah, it's like a leading question, right? Like you don't just say like, okay, well now what do you do? You like reframe it really hard and say the thief is flying over the edge of the cliff and barely hanging on. What do you do? Right.
And that goes into golden opportunities. Is like the thief is flying over the cliff, an arrow is shooting at your character, what do you do? And then they want to talk, or they want to they want another attempt at this chest, and it's like, okay, you can do that. An arrow just buried itself into your torso.
Right. Yeah. I usually explain it, but I usually say, well, if you do that, this is what's going to happen.
It's probably going to go bad for your thief friend.
Sometimes I explain it. Sometimes I just do it, and they learn. They learn the hard way. It's like, oh wait. Yeah, I have to deal with the fiction.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
You have to pay attention. Another issue is just, I mentioned abstraction. Often it has to do with, like, position. Can I get behind this guy? Is there a table in the room? How close or what is the distance? And I generally don't have maps. I generally just say, like I said, pitch me the idea. If you want to jump on the troll's back, that can happen.
If it's interesting for you to have a table in the room right now, then there is. Right.
Yeah.
And so,
exactly.
And some players might, if they're new to the thing, or until they see someone do that, they might not think it's allowed. And so they get that initial reaction of, hey, wait, I didn't know we could do that.
Yeah. If they start offering up like ideas like, well, is there a table? Because I want to flip the table and hide behind it. Like, if they start doing stuff like that, I give and take. Like, sometimes I'm like, yes, there isn't. But some other times, if I think that it's more interesting that there not be, then I'm like, no.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. A lot of times, players too. I even play with lots of like really seasoned PBTA players who still do this, where they they say, is it okay if I do this? Or I don't want to mess up what you have going on with the story. Is it okay if I do this? And in which case, I think it's just more of a courtesy thing, right? And so I definitely do run into that every now and then still. But the other issue is, that's like, it's one of those sort of like, those things that really like awaken in your brain when you first start playing Dungeon World, right? Like, adventuring gear. What the fuck does that mean? Like, what do I have? Well, it means you've got 5 things, right?
Yeah.
5 things that you definitely planned for. You have the 5 things that you need because you're a good planner. And, the abstraction concept is so difficult when you are accustomed to games where you have literal shopping lists of things to purchase.
Did you bring your 10-foot pole? No.
Right. Like, what is the point of having money, and what is the point of having prices listed for things if I was not expected to plan appropriately and bring all the stuff that I was supposed to bring? Right.
I used to spend so much time on those lists and spend every single copper I had. Make sure I had clothes and tent and cooking gear and lard
and there's still a pleasure in that, right? I mean, I still kind of like get a kick out of doing that. Whenever I have a chance to play a more trad game, I'm always kind of into that. But the adventuring gear is just one of the idea of abstraction, the idea of like we're kind of creating fiction. These are all part and parcel of this is a writer's room process, right? We are making the film, and we are we're using the tools that we need.
I think another important part of that is it can slow the game way down if the new player is making his plans by himself. So he starts asking questions like, where is this guy? Is there a table in the room? How many hit points? It's like, you're planning something. Just pitch me the idea.
Right.
What do you want to see happen here? And we'll work together.
What are you trying to do here? Yeah, just tell me what you're trying to do.
And that might be him thinking, I'm going to try to stop him, if he doesn't work up the justification.
I think there's always a right way to handle that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, this is a good topic. Thank you for bringing it up. I think it's always good to come back to kind of the roots and the core of what is Dungeon World to new players, and how can you be more successful in your first few games at the table.
I agree. It is something we get asked a lot, and I never, or like on the G+, we get asked that a lot. I never chime in because I feel like I'm so removed from it. But yeah, it was good to kind of talk about it again.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Should I Be on the Lookout For?
Listeners, we are joined by one of the runners-up in our Shrine contest and author of the excellent Swordbreaker Dungeon World zine, Logan Howard. Hi, Logan. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that.
Yeah, congratulations.
So, Logan, for this segment, what are we talking about today?
I thought we'd talk about Session Zero, which is Brian Holland's zine, and it's a really nifty little zine about kind of preparing to dive into a game. So it's called Session Zero because it's sort of everything that happens before the game starts. What I really like about it is that it's kind of a lesson in creative constraint. It has to do a lot with using what's familiar to us, movies and comic books, other things that we enjoy, favorite books, things like that, and then starting with that as the basis. But then when you build your starter questions based on those things, what you end up with is really different than what you started out with.
Interesting. So I'll fess up to not having looked at Session Zero yet. I know David has, but maybe give me an example of what you mean. Like, what are some of the themes or topics that he's done in the past?
So one of the most recent ones was the Dark Forest, and it's sort of all around the Harry Potter forest scenes. There's a bunch of them in the Harry Potter series, but this sort of uses a lot of material from that, including some of the magic items and things that appear in Harry Potter, but kind of all tweaked a little bit. But the
I assume with the serial numbers filed off, right? I mean,
right, exactly. But the cool thing about it is that it kind of shows you a way that you can take things that you love, and then when you start a Dungeon World game with them, they don't end up the same place that the fiction ends up, like you don't actually play Harry Potter, you just use the ideas in Harry Potter to come up with something completely new.
Yes, I've only read the first issue, which was credited as inspired by The Princess Bride, and definitely was. I saw that through line as I was reading it. He does a really nice job with his layout, and he's got some nice art in here. I was impressed for it being a first issue of a zine that, seems to be, at least, I don't know for sure, but it seems to be largely something that he cares about and is driving, and not necessarily like making a ton of money off of it.
Right, yeah, it's definitely a passion project. He absolutely, he was nervous going into it. I talked to him a little bit before he started, and gosh, he's just really knocked it out of the park. I think he does a really beautiful job. The one thing I really like about his approach that was different than mine is that he started off taking a lot of cues from the actual Dungeon World book, in that like he has his own principles for doing his zine, which I thought was a really cool idea, and also kind of plays with that same creative constraint idea where if he gives himself some guidelines, he can really take things further by having a clear path that he's going to travel down.
It's a super interesting idea. I've always been a big fan of this notion that we achieve better role-playing results when all of the players at the table are kind of in the same headspace, right? Which is why I personally tend to disfavor what I call like ornate settings, which is settings that have lots of very specific, unusual, abstract details, right? What I like about this idea, and mind you, I haven't read it yet, but what I like about this idea, as you guys have explained it, is most people have seen The Princess Bride, right? Like most people have read Harry Potter. Like I know the Dark Forest scene with the spiders and all that stuff, right? And so you can kind of, it's good. It seems like a good tool for like creating shared headspace at the table. I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly it. His other one is the Barrow, which is kind of loosely based on Skyrim. And so tons of people know lots about that, but where it actually takes you in a Dungeon World game is really different. But you have that feeling, oh, I kind of know this, and then working together, it's really fun to explore the new directions that you can go with that.
Well, that's awesome. Do you know what his release schedule's like, or like how you can get a hold of these things?
Yeah, he's doing, I think, pretty much one a month, and he's been doing them through Patreon. And right now he's on a little bit of a delay. Unfortunately, he got into an accident, so he's recovering from that. So, but he should be back on schedule before too long.
Yeah, I picked mine up on Drive-Thru RPG. At least the first one is Pay What You Want. Oh, I don't know if that continues through, but it's definitely worth checking out, keeping an eye on, if you are looking for some good resources on how to think about getting your sessions going, especially if you like to play in inspired worlds that are, from fiction and pop culture and things that you like.
Well, so Logan, while we've got you on, I think it was very magnanimous of you to use this segment to talk about someone else's zine. But what's going on with Swordbreaker? What's the story with that right now?
Well, I'm on issue 5 right now. I'm working on awesome. Sort of a Thundar the Barbarian theme.
Oh, nice. I'm here for that.
It's not super close, but I've been looking at a lot of the OSR zines and really liking what I'm seeing there. There's one called Crawling Under a Broken Moon, which I think is really fun.
DCC one. Yeah.
It's a super crazy mutant future with super science and sorcery all mixed into each other. So
no, that's super cool. I love it. Carcosa is basically Thundar and He-Man, right? Essentially, that's kind of, I'm super into all of those things. That's pretty badass. Oh, for OSR zines, I love the other big DCC one. Crawl is really great. I like There's one called the Oubliette, which I picked up just because it's called the Oubliette. Yeah. It's pretty good. I love OSR zines. Those were a huge inspiration for Codex too, even though Codex is more of a sort of like a zine in the sort of like art movement sense than like the old school role playing game sense. But definitely, I love that whole like zine energy, and I like that you and Brian and Ray and us to some degree are part of like this sort of Dungeon World zine thing, right? Like it feels like
where
the new
I want it to
age.
go. I want to get more people involved.
yeah, it's cool. Like I think it's a great natural outcome for Dungeon World. I think because to me Dungeon World is mechanically very like indie or PBTA, but in spirit it's pretty old school, right? Like I've always thought it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like really excited that there's Dungeon World specific material being produced on a regular basis that's in a smaller, more consumable format than some of the bigger supplements.
Yeah. Well, and I like this sort of like creative energy and the sort of DIY spirit of zines as opposed to like big, very, very like large production value books, right? I love those things too, but there's something about the immediacy and the urgency and the sort of like just do it because I have an idea nature of zines, which I think is great. So super cool. We'll check out Session 0. We'll put some links to that and to Swordbreaker in the end notes.
Yeah, there's a lot of people lurking in the background there that I think ought to step up and do some more. I noticed I really like Stephen Carnes, what he's doing, and
who's on this episode?
Mark Tigert, and just a bunch of people that I want to see more material coming out.
Cool. Was there anything else you want to say about Session 0?
I'm really excited to see where it's going to go. I know the next one is sort of a island, kind of a Batman theme thing, which is really cool, taking something that you don't normally associate with a fantasy setting, but making it into a fantasy setting. I think it's a really cool way to drag inspiration from somewhere unusual. He's kind of statting out all the villains as though they're fantasy versions of themselves. Really fun stuff.
Nice.
Cool. Awesome.
Well, thank you, Logan. Let's go ahead and move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here Is Not What It Appears to Be.
Listeners, we are joined by the winner of our Shrine contest, Stephen Carnes. Stephen, hi.
Hey, thanks for having me on. This is really great.
Absolutely. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah. We're going to have, I can't wait to share your shrine with folks. But before we do that, we're going to do this segment, What Here Is Not What It Appears to Be. And you wanted to talk about the ritual move, right?
I did. Yeah. It's something I've been thinking a lot about lately. The game I wrapped up maybe a year ago with my previous group. The move kind of came up organically a lot, and it was a lot of fun. And those people, whenever they talk about that game, they often kind of latch onto those ritual moves that we did. But it's not something I feel like, I see kind of out there in the Dungeon World conversation a lot. So I thought it might be worth taking a closer look at.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we have had some recent experience with as well. And I think that you're absolutely right. It's something that doesn't get hit on a lot. Implementing it can be a little tricky because it can be a little involved.
I mean, that's the nature of it, though, is that it is involved. And I think that's what I like about it is it kind of makes Magic and Dungeon World a bit dirty or something. If a ritual takes 12 hours to perform and requires blood sacrifice, then that's I feel like Magic and Dungeon World is often a little sterile or a little easy sometimes, and so I like the idea of ritual being this more kind of occult approach to Magic.
I think that's great. The way I always view ritual vis-a-vis the rest of the stuff that the wizard can do is, to me, the spells, that's like the fast magic. That's the at-hand magic. It is I just have to speak the last syllable for the magic missile to fire off, and then it might be wiped from my memory, Vancian style magic, right? Whereas like ritual is like you said, it's that grittier, it's that deeper, it's that more comprehensive and powerful version of magic that wizards spend their whole careers researching and trying to master, right? And so I think just at the outset, I kind of view ritual in that way, like as this very special thing, and I don't just let players do it easily.
Sure.
It's a thing. Yeah, it's got to be earned.
So what constitutes a place of power in your universe?
Good question. I guess we could do this by example or speak generally about it. Like, David, what's a place of power for you?
Well, places of power can be lots of different things for me. And usually if it's getting so close that the players are talking about having a ritual, I will indicate a place that they have experienced recently where magic has been happening, or tell them a place where they could find a rumor. They go to a tavern and find a rumor about where a place of power might be. That's usually how I handle it. I don't usually declare places of power in advance unless there's player interest in performing a ritual.
Yeah, normally the way I do it is, well, I will say, just as far as some examples of what a place of power might be, I think it could run the full range of locations and experiences, right? I mean, but typically it's something like an ancient cemetery, a historical battleground, something where something really traumatic and emotional took place. One of my favorite places of power that I've done in the past was this spot where a dragon had died and it scarred the earth. I think I ripped that off from something, but that was a place of power, right? Because it was this convergence of this powerful creature with this sort of ripping through the land, so it can be kind of anything. What I really want to say here, though, is that I actually don't ever call them out. I rarely do. I rarely say, oh, this is a place of power. Normally what I do is, like David said, if the player is interested in doing a ritual and they think they're in a place of power, I will usually ask them some questions to help flesh out the world. For me, that part of the ritual move is a world building opportunity. And so I'll ask things like, well, why do you think this is a place of power? What do you suppose happened here? Or why do you think why do you think this particular cemetery might be a place of power versus the cemetery over by, the village church or whatever, that kind of thing. And then after the player has kind of given us some fiction and given us some world building, then I feel like they've kind of earned it. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach rather than calling them out, which in the game I referenced earlier, that's kind of the way the places of power arose organically, is that there were only a handful of them in the universe. They were super well guarded. Any place of power had a wizard attached to it who was kind of protecting it. But I also like that more, places of power are sites of great battles or sort of fissures in the boundary between our world and the magic world or whatever. I think that's a cool approach. And I've been reading the Dresden Files recently, and if you're not familiar with it, he makes his own places of power by he'll perform ritual magic by drawing a circle on the ground with chalk and sitting inside of it, and he says it makes a dome of energy around him. And so he kind of imbues the location with his own magical energy to create a place of power. And I think that's a really kind of interesting idea for sort of shorter ritual magic as well.
Yeah, I think if I allowed a player to do that, I would definitely tailor the scope down about what they could actually accomplish with such a ritual, right? I mean, because I do tend to believe that the ritual should be, it should have the feeling of being somewhat out of reach, right?
Sure.
Unless it's a fast thing, right? That's it's a thing that's just not covered by spells, right? That seems we need to disable this particular magical effect or something like that. To me, that's a short ritual, right?
Right.
But for sure.
Yeah, we definitely did some ritual-esque things, quite a few of them recently, in a World of Dungeons game where I was playing a wizard. And that was kind of what we would do, is we wouldn't have a place of power or anything like that. I don't even know if in World of Dungeons it calls out that you need one, but I would, the character would draw.
All spellcasting is basically the ritual move in World of Dungeons, right? Essentially, okay. Unless you take the little quicksilver hit or whatever, right? I mean, right. You have to spend at least a minimum of an hour, right, to get your
right.
effect.
But in lieu of a place of power, you describe what you're doing in that hour that would make it happen.
Mixed are great scenes, huh? I mean, those scenes that your wizard did in World of Dungeons were those little, obviously we didn't spend a whole hour hour doing it, but we kind of, hand waved the time. But the scenes that came out of like the rest of the party waiting on you to finish the ritual were pretty great. I mean, there were just so many little great moments.
They were good. And I think part of that was what I'm concerned about with these ritual moves is I would actively involve other players in the ritual. But the ritual move in Dungeon World and World of Dungeons doesn't require that you do that. And that's what I'm always concerned about.
Unless you choose requires the help of, your fellow party member, right? Well, that's a good segue. I mean, why don't we talk a little bit about like actually, I'll just throw it over to you, Stephen. This is your topic. I mean, where do you want to go from here with this?
Sure. No, I think what you were about to say is talking about the requirements that the GM might put onto it. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting approach to it too, because then it becomes an opportunity for, world building, a conversation between players, potentially a side quest, so to speak, if you have to go seek out certain rare components or, for example, we did a ritual that required sort of 12 hours and there were other people trying to interrupt it. And so while the wizard is performing the ritual, you've got the ranger and the barbarian fighting off, waves of monsters or whatever. And I like that about the ritual is that it's a little story folded into a mechanic.
I agree. My favorite ritual I think that I've done this was actually a Dungeon Planet. We had like Dungeon Planet playbooks and Dungeon World playbooks, but it was a Carcosa thing. And I kind of lifted this a little bit from the Carcosa book. It wasn't one of the nasty Carcosa rituals. It was something different. But the idea was there's this tree, this big blue tree, and basically the wizard had to be like crucified to the tree for 3 days, right, in order to get the effect they wanted. And it was a whole session basically of the party basically defending the wizard while the wizard basically suffered like being crucified to this tree, right? And we kind of explored the wizard's kind of psyche and what was going on with him too. You're right, there's so much story potential inside of the ritual move, and I really think that's kind of the purpose of it, and a great feature. Well, why don't we talk about some of the requirements then, and maybe some different ways of using them, or maybe talking about why you might use them, I guess, or why you might choose a certain thing. I will straight away say that I think requires a lot of money is really boring, and it's boring,
I think that could be interesting if it
were
requires like an unseemly amount of money, like an amount of money that would really call undue attention to yourself, or would require, if you're asking the paladin to rob a bank to fund it, then I think that's interesting. But yeah, just it's a bit like dealing damage. It feels a bit easy. I suppose
it's throwbackish to me. It feels like a D&D throwback, because I remember, to do resurrection or to create a magical item, you got to blow like 20,000 gold pieces or whatever it was, right?
Yeah, I think there's two circumstances I might consider doing that money one. One, if they don't have a place of power and are having to like buy their way into one, or two, if I really am not interested in them doing the ritual at all. Like the effect that they have is like something I don't want, so I could just put a price ceiling on it that they can never reach.
I wouldn't do that. I would probably like try to talk to them and figure out a way of making the ritual something more I feel like I'm trying to imagine like what that would even be, and it seems like it would just be something that would be so like gonzo and ridiculous, in which case that feels like a different conversation to me. But yeah, I mean, one thing that you can do to sort of, because I think there's a potential for a ritual to get a little out of hand, something you can do to kind of, an easy check on a ritual is to choose the option that it can be unreliable, right? And require a roll. That's usually what I do. I just I force a roll on that one normally. I think that's a great way of kind of balancing it out a little bit, to the extent that anything can be unbalanced in Dungeon World, which I don't really think it can. But there are instances where it's been nice to be able to say, well, okay, that's cool, and you'll get basically that, but there's some unreliability there.
Other requirements.
Yeah. Days, weeks, months. What do you guys think about this?
Yeah, I think it's excellent. I think months is interesting. I mean, if you're taking your players out of the fiction for months, you're going to be required to do a bit of hand waving, which is not always super interesting. But then if you're tying it in with you'll need help from blank, then that can kind of take care of that a bit. You need help from the mad wizard in the tower, who is going to start the ritual for the next 3 weeks for you and you're going to come along and help them finish it or whatever. But I like the hours or days. I like this idea that it takes a long time and it's a commitment, and maybe your wizard emerges from this physically and magically exhausted, so to speak. Like, I like this idea that it's a sort of a drain on the party almost. Because again, one thing that draws me to the ritual is that it isn't easy and it's not neat. It's not clean. It's a bit dirty. It's a bit. Yeah, I just like that kind of occult angle to it. Like you're sort of messing with forces beyond your control.
It's a sword and sorcery approach to magic, right? I mean, I think that's the kind of magic I favor rather than like a high fantasy sort of magic that's implied by Dungeon World. I mean, I play Dungeon World according to its rules and according to its tropes and all the other things that are hung on top of it from D&D. But ultimately, my personal preference, and we've talked about this before, David, is this idea that magic is very difficult, right? It's very difficult and should take a long time. What do you guys think about this idea of having like multiple rituals going on at once? I've never done this, but it seems to me that you could have like, rituals that are like in the foreground and rituals in the background that are taking longer. And I think I might try that. It seems like you could kind of weave some fun things there. Like, I'm almost thinking of like burning wheels, like sort of chained rolls, like where you have to succeed at this thing to make this thing happen or whatever. I don't know, just throwing an idea out there, but it seems like there are ways you could kind of play with that temporal space to make some interesting stories going on. All the other options to me are the more interesting ones ultimately. All the remaining options where you have to fill in the blank, to me, I love those because they're just kind of a reason to have a conversation at the table, right, with the players. Yeah. And I think that's the key, right? Like, just get into this collaborative space. To me, those options are there just to flag to everybody at the table that, like, maybe we should talk about this a little bit. Let's have this conversation. Let's talk about what the ritual looks like. Let's talk about who might be implicated. Let's talk about who this ritual might piss off. All that stuff, right? Yeah,
before we get into that, I did have one quick thing I want to say about the days, weeks, months. And that would be, I would encourage, if you run games, kind of like we run games here with the Gauntlet, where you'll have a series of 4 and then a break and then another series, and there's implied time between. An epilogue at the end where your wizard is talking about doing something like a ritual, that'd be perfect time to encourage them to do it and say, well, it'll take months, and by next session, at the beginning of next session, we can have the roll, or if it's unreliable, or it'll take its effect if it's not unreliable.
That's an interesting idea. It almost sounds like the love letter aspect, where you could say, wizard, you've been away for a month. What ritual did you perform? Who helped you do it?
That's a good idea.
What did you have to disenchant to perform it? Yeah. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, love letter. That's a great idea too. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so these other options, I mean, I don't have anything else to say about them other than just I think they're great conversation starters.
Yeah. You just I mean, what it's like. First, you must blank. It will need help from blank. You'll have to disenchant blank to do it, and you and your allies will risk the danger from blank. Yeah, all of those are great, like, painting the scene kinds of questions.
As a GM, I disclaim lots of decision-making responsibility at the table. It's my secret sauce. I let the players decide a lot of stuff, right? And this is one of those, like, great times, right? Because, maybe I want to choose this thing, but I don't have any ideas for it. Or maybe the players have a better idea, right? Maybe they have a better, because the players will always choose the harder thing. My players at least will always choose the more fictionally interesting, complicated thing, right? They're never going to go with the easy move. So,
I don't. Yeah. I go with the easy thing. I'm not.
Do you?
I'm not a glutton for punishment. It's the GM's job to make life hard.
Most of my players are pretty much like, oh yeah, I want to jump in front of trouble. What do you think, Stephen?
Yeah, I think that tends to be true with my players as well. Is that they lean on the fiction a lot harder, and again, I think that is why I like the ritual move so much. It's that snowballing aspect of Dungeon World that makes it so clever. Kind of rolled into a move, and especially for the wizard, who I've had the fortune of introducing a lot of like RPG neophytes to role-playing games, but specifically to Dungeon World, and inevitably you get a wizard who doesn't really know what they're doing, and I just like that ritual move where you say, like, all right, well, what do you want to do? Like, don't look at your spell sheets, don't worry about that. Like, you tell me what you're trying to do, and then you guys figure out how to make that happen. And then it does kind of force their hand a little bit if they're not, maybe engaging with the fiction as much as they could be. You kind of put that on them a little bit more. Like you said, you hand over a lot of the narrative responsibility to the table, and then you just let them work out what is this ritual going to look like. What do you think you'll need to do it? Who might be a person you need to talk to? And I think it's a really elegant move. And again, it was just something that I kind of don't see people talking about as much as other things. Well, and two, I think the wizard has there's a lot of hate for the wizard, or maybe not hate, but I think people tend to use other spellcasting playbooks.
I mean, we're using mage right now in our current series. I mean, but I flip back and forth. I like them both.
I've only ever used all the core books, but I've only ever used the wizard, and I'm quite fond of it. And I think the ritual is one reason that I do like it so much.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a move that doesn't get talked about much. I have a feeling the reason why it maybe doesn't get a lot of like discussion around it is because most people exist in a dungeon world space where they're just moving from room to room, killing monsters, right? And so there's not like a lot of room, like, fireball's doing the trick,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
So yeah. I kind of suspect that's probably why people just don't see the advantages of ritual,
sure.
Right? I mean,
or they kind of don't have the downtime.
Yeah. If your mission is just to kill the monsters that are in the dungeon, you're not going to stop to do a ritual. But if there's like some kind of elaborate puzzle or doorway that you cannot get through for some reason or other, that's when the party has to stop and turn to the wizard and be like, what are we going to do about this? Or,
your GM's revealed something on their campaign fronts that's really, really big and earth-shattering and needs some kind of attention, and only a ritual will do the job. I mean, I have used ritual to drive so many stories. I mean, gosh, the AP we did for Domenico on comic strip AP, that was the whole AP was just doing a ritual, right? I mean, there's a lot of potential there. Good topic.
Oh yeah. So I see on your notes here, Stephen, that you have some other interesting ways that it looks like you have been using rituals. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So, so I just mentioned earlier, like using the Dresden Files for inspiration, where the wizard gets to kind of do small rituals. So again, as an example, like you've got a bit of blood of a monster and a compass. And so you put a drop of blood on the compass and you meditate on your place of power and you create a tracking spell. And again, from the Dresden Files, he creates his own potions, and they're, they require one element of each. So he was trying to make a concealment potion. So cotton for the touch and, plain white paper for the mind. So these like thematic elements that go into crafting the potion. And I thought that was a really interesting idea too, is letting the wizard kind of have these little rituals. They don't really do much. But you give the wizard a chance to do like small magic. And I also think it would be, I tend to play the game with smaller groups, with like 3 PCs. And so that does let the wizard kind of fill in the blanks a little bit too. If you're, missing a ranger who can't do a track, and you need to track something, you can kind of approach it that way.
When you do those little small magics, do you let them like write that down and like be a thing they can repeat?
In the sense that it's a ritual move. So yeah, I mean, the ritual move says the ritual is always possible, but so you say,
true.
You can do that again, but you do need if you are trying to track the creature, you will need its blood or its hair or something like that. Right. Or maybe you need, or the tracking ritual it's not going to tell you exactly where it is. It's going to give you a cardinal direction or something like that. But I think it's a good opportunity to kind of plug some of those holes in your party too.
Well, what I like about what you just said there, Stephen, about this, about these like sort of like smaller rituals with like, like minimal components and requirements. What I like about that is it actually lets you also fill in the gaps in the spell book, right? Because the big gripe that a lot of people have who come from D&D is that the spells are limited, right? Like there's a really small like number of spells. Well, if you want polymorph other, or if you want cloud kill, then do a little ritual and make it a thing.
Yeah, do a ritual, write it on a scroll. We know there are scrolls out there. Who's making all these scrolls? Wizards.
Yeah, exactly. Or potions, or magic rings or whatever.
Awesome.
Let's move on to our next segment.
This episode of Discern Realities is being sponsored by Scablands Press and their game The Indie Hack. Here's a description from Drive-Thru. The Indie Hack is a minimalist fantasy role-playing game built up from the ideas in the Black Hack that is played with pencils, paper, dice, and imagination. It takes old-school gaming and gives it an indie edge. You get heroes, magic, traps, and monsters, but the players get more control over the richness of the story. Listeners, if you're interested in hearing how the Indie Hack plays, I highly recommend our other podcast, Comic Strip AP. Slade Stoller, the author of the game, just finished a 12-episode series of the Indie Hack, and it is dynamite. It gives you a really good sense of how the game's core mechanic encourages and empowers the players to help the GM build up the fiction of the world that they're playing in. Comic Strip AP can be found on the Gauntlet's YouTube channel or in the Comic Strip AP page of gauntlet-rpg.com. To get a copy of the Indie Hack, just search for it on Drive-Thru, or if you're just interested in the core mechanic, you can find the free system reference document on the Scablands website. Thanks again to Slade and Scablands for sponsoring the show.
Our next segment is What Here is Useful or Valuable to Me?
Okay, so we are back again with Logan Howard, one of the runners-up in our contest, to talk about his entry, The Cliff of Shuachi. Now, this was my runner-up that was put to a vote to our community, and the community chose it, which is awesome. I'm a big fan of this one. We're going to read it first, and then we're going to talk about it. So, Logan, kick us off. Give us the intro text for The Cliff of Shuachi.
On windswept cliffs, travelers will often find holes drilled into the rock. Religious scholars might recognize the holes as a shrine to the ancient goddess Shuachi. A practitioner would have inserted wooden dowels into the holes and tied long strips of colorful cloth to them. Unable to resist playing with the lovely streamers, Shuachi, goddess of wind, laughter, forgetfulness, and secrets, would soon arrive.
When you tell Shuachi a painful memory, ask for the return of laughter, and throw yourself from her cliff, roll plus wisdom. On a 12+, Shuachi catches you and returns you to the top of the cliff. You forget your painful memory and you gain 2 wind. On a 10+, Shuachi catches you and returns you to the top of the cliff. You forget your painful memory and you gain 1 wind. On a 7 to 9, Shuachi catches you and sets you down in a location of the GM's choosing. You forget your painful memory. The wind will provide you with a secret when the time is right. At any time, you may trade 1 wind for one of the following. Shuachi catches you when you would fall to your death. Shuachi whispers a secret into your ear. Shuachi sweeps something evil from a high place. Shuachi takes a painful memory from a friend. Shuachi lifts you higher when you jump. Shuachi carries something from your hand to a friend, no matter how far away.
And here are the magic items associated with this shrine. The Cloak of Shuachi. The silver-gray cloak of Shuachi will only work when worn by someone who is joyful. It shuns all other armor. The cloak defends the wearer in a multitude of ways. It can billow out to catch incoming projectiles before they strike the body. It might push an opponent off balance, or simply shift to create the illusion that the wearer is in a different position. The cloak provides perfect balance, aids jumps, and cushions falls. It has 3 armor and no weight. Shuachi's pen. Shuachi's pen is a sky blue stylus used with any ink and paper. When you write a message with Shuachi's pen, the wind will pick up and lift the ink from the paper. The wind will blow in such a way that the message will form near the intended receiver. Perhaps the writing will appear in the rivulets of sand or leaves could scatter, only to land in perfectly shaped sentences.
So I will say what I liked about this one, because it was one of my finalists. I said this a little bit in our special episode for the Shrine contest, but I think that the custom move and the way that you interact with the Shrine is incredibly dramatic. It asks you to hurl yourself off a cliff, so it's just super dramatic. And I want to see I want to see the fictional circumstances that lead up to this moment, right? Like I want to see like what it is that makes this like a viable option for the player. So I think that's super cool. I think that I like all the effects that you can spend the wind on. It almost becomes like a little power, which I think is cool. I'm particularly fond of the Featherfall one for some reason, because there is no Featherfall spell in Dungeon World, which is a classic D&D spell they managed to leave out. The items are really neat. I think there's just a certain thematic consistency throughout the whole thing. This idea of memories and messages and fleeting thoughts and all that stuff. Like I just think it's really great. It's very evocative and well written. So good job, Logan. What inspired you on this? Like, why was what were you thinking when you came up with this one?
It's funny. I thought it'd be cool to have one that's sort of a cliff top or someplace that wasn't really typical. Just this is obviously a shrine.
Walking to the temple or whatever.
You'd have to kind of know what was going on to even understand it was a shrine. And the name Shuachi came to me because I'm a big old Ultraman fan, and it's the sound he makes when he's about to fly. He goes Shuach.
I did not know that.
So for some reason, just starting with that, I started to write. And then I thought what I like about wind is that it's sort of playful in a way. And so there's a certain joy to it. And I thought, well, one of the things about that playfulness is that when people are really heavy of spirit, it might be kind of cool to have this patron god that helps them lift up their spirits by taking away their pain and kind of giving them an opportunity to see things a different way. And I tied that into the cloak, having it only work for joyful people, because I thought, oh, well, what an unusual thing. We're all kind of used to that dark, brooding character, but what about someone who actually can't even use their best powers without kind of maintaining a level of happiness?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, I really am living for it right now thematically. Like, it fits in with a lot of the fantasy fiction that I'm reading right now. The King Killer Chronicles are all about a character trying to find the name of the wind, and then the Stormlight Chronicles has a key character that is a wind spren, which is like a playful spirit that exists as a kind of incarnation of the wind and has kind of a similar relationship that you're describing. It's great.
Well, I don't know if you intended it this way or not, or if this is just an interesting happenstance, but in tarot card reading, the suit of swords is typically associated with the mind and with painful memories, right? And it is also associated with the wind. That's of the four elements, swords are associated with the wind. And so I know in a lot of like mythology and a lot of like sort of like folk magic and things like that, wind is associated with the mind. And so I just thought like it was a really neat thematic through line through the whole thing. It really spoke to me in that way.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
I want to ask you about the format. We got a lot of really great entries. The entries were like exceptional in this contest in terms of their quality. Do you think that the 400 word maximum like helped you in terms of like revising the text and making it really, really good?
It probably forced me to present something a little better than I would have originally, because I went way over it first and had to cut it way back.
Okay. I'm curious about that, because that was the impression we got. We're like, gosh, these are so good. And I think it's because they had to like make it work in 400 words. So yeah.
That's probably right.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks so much for participating in the contest, Logan. I don't have any more questions. David, do you?
No. Congratulations on being a runner-up, and congratulations on the success of your zine, and I hope to see more of your entries in future contests.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate being on my favorite podcast.
Awesome.
Listeners, I am here with Daniel Fowler once again. We're here to talk about his shrine that won the runner-up portion for my little chunk of the shrines, Gnozzinu. Danny, you want to go ahead and read the intro text and move for that?
Okay. This is the Ever-drilling Shrine of Gnozzinu, the machine god of the gnomes. Discovered by gnomish settlers over 1,100 years ago, this device has never ceased in its work. A constant growl and grinding noise can be heard as it shapes the stone under it. Every few years, it moves further down, revealing a passageway with rooms, stairs, and stone furnishings. This is the secret of the wealth of the gnomes, allowing them to expand their city and harvest the earth's resources, already refined and stacked in pre-made storage rooms. Some sought to understand and improve the machine, but most would not risk losing such a gift. Now they worship it, bringing offerings of grease and pure water, which seems to reduce the grinding noise and improve its performance. Only the most respected tinkerers are allowed to touch the controls. Mostly, it seems to have no immediate effect, but occasionally Gnozzinu responds and reveals its latest work. Repeating the same adjustments never seems to work and often causes the machine to shake violently. If you are allowed to fiddle with Gnozzinu's controls, roll plus int. On a 7 through 9, the shrine moves, revealing a new passage, and you choose one. On a 10 plus, choose another. On a 6 minus, the machine begins to rattle, screech, and otherwise show its displeasure, attracting the ire of all gnome kind. And your choices are the passage. 1 includes a store of rare gems and metals worth 3d10 times 10 GP. Second option is includes a workshop complete with tools. Thirdly, includes an armory with finely crafted mail and weaponry. And lastly, does not include a trap or guardian.
Awesome. And here are the 2 magic items associated with this shrine. Gnozzinu's Wayward Bit. Left behind after a great earthquake, this device is probably malfunctional. When applied to a stone surface, it glows red hot and sinks in. Seconds later, it jerks loose in a shower of broken stone. This process is very dangerous, but can easily reduce a fortification to rubble, or blast a jagged passage through the earth. Roll a d6 before each use. On a 1, the device works properly and disintegrates, leaving a perfectly crafted apartment. And then here's the second item. Gnozzinu's Spawn, 6 weight. This device is completely dormant while in the domain of its parent, but the gnomes will not let anyone carry it away without great cost or bloodshed. It will begin to dig if brought to a new location. Eventually, it will unfold to its complete size and start producing passages and rooms shaped to the proportions of whoever activated it. Awesome. So I love this shrine. I love that it's probably just a big machine that these gnomes worship, and they pour water in it, and they're like, it's making it happier.
It always ends up to be a giant nuclear bomb or something, whatever the primitives are worshipping.
Right? Yeah. So what was your inspiration for this?
Yeah, the main inspiration for this was a book called Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, and I'm probably mispronouncing their names. There is a very famous Russian science fiction book. And the idea is that this, if like we were visited by advanced aliens and like they're beyond our comprehension, just their debris and stuff, like the litter they leave behind, we wouldn't comprehend, but we might make use of, right? So you imagine like if you went and had a picnic and then the ants come by and they find your plastic bag, it's an invisible force field that kills them, but they might end up, it would change the whole world. The introduction of a plastic bag or a spoonful of jam would just be like immense riches for the ants. So this is obviously a machine. It's way beyond the gnomes' ability to deal with, but they can sort of maintain it, sort of protect it. I also like the idea of basically if it's not broke, don't fix it. Anytime someone tinkers with something, it might fail, and then it's like expression is killing the golden goose.
Yeah. It's great. Like this, what you've managed in 400 words is very much like almost an adventure starter in 400 words. Yeah. That's a shrine. Like I could see a series of just following through on this machine, trying to get its spawn to a new location to start drilling somewhere else. Like, it's so also good.
It's a great, the thought of like, who is making all these dungeons? Do you have like goblin work crews? And I mean, it's magical universe, but it might as well be a machine that no one understands.
It's just building more and more dungeons that eventually get inhabited by skeletons and whatnot.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, congratulations for being runner-up, and hope to see some more of your entries in future contests.
Okay, we're back with Steven to discuss his winning entry for the Shrine contest. This is the Shrine of Alamas. Before we discuss it, let's read through it. Steven, do you want to read the opening text?
Sure. Dream is the realm of Alom, and its ruler is Alamas. An old woman motions for you to lie upon a bed of straw and hemp, at the foot of which is laid a blue candle, a bundle of dried cedar, and the decaying skull of a hare. She begins to hum, almost imperceptibly, a droning lullaby like a memory from someone else's childhood. She lights the candle, and with its flame the cedar, which she places beneath the skull. And as she does this, she whispers, "To Alamas, to know her, may you never awaken." Smoke and shadows play across the ceiling, coalescing into forms which writhe in the acrid air. First one and then another take on likenesses which you can't quite name, if only they would remain a little longer. A few minutes pass, or is it hours, and a single mass takes shape above you, its eyes the color of the candle's flame, as sleep crashes into you like a wave.
And here's the move. When you sleep beside the Shrine of Alamas, roll plus wisdom. On a 10+, you have returned from Alom with an item. Describe it. The GM will tell you one flaw it possesses. On a 7 to 9, same as 10+, and the GM chooses 3 flaws. On a miss, your dreams will forever encroach upon your reality. The GM will describe a permanent flaw, debility, or other weakness you now possess. And the list of flaws here are: it will last no longer than a day. It is a danger to yourself or the party. Its effects will be less powerful or have limited uses. It requires all your concentration to keep it in this plane. As long as it's in your possession, you take -1 ongoing to all rolls.
And here's the magic item. Upinshad's ink, 1 use. This simple vial contains a swirling Byzantium ink. When you uncork the bottle and place it beside a blank parchment and quill before sleeping, roll plus wisdom. On a 10+, you awaken to a message written in your own hand. The message may be a portent, forgotten memory, solution to a problem, or something else. On a 7 to 9, the same as a 10+, but the message will require the assistance of an expert to decipher. And here's the spell. Exile to Alom. You banish a single object to the realm of dreams. As long as it remains there, it will never deteriorate. You may recall it any time, though it may be slightly different than you remember.
Well, let's talk about why it was the winner. So the way we did this is David and I, we gradually whittled down our personal favorite lists of all the entries we got down to 6 each. And this shrine was the only one of all 12 of those that was on both lists. And so I think that says a lot about it, because this was a really, really strong contest. The entries were bonkers good. I mean, there were so many good entries. And so the fact that this one ended up on both of ours, it really says something. David, what did you like about it?
Well, I love the intro text. It's such a good scene. It's not just me looking at something, it's things happening and I'm drawn in. We have characters in play with this strange shrine and ritual interaction. And then I'm big into this other world of dreams being a real place, so real that you could place an item there, but it's going to have effects. So I love how the spell's tied into the shrine, how that's tied into what happens if you sleep at the shrine. You can find other items. I like that this magic item is tied into this dreams as well, where you can find information out of your dreams, and it may be something that you didn't even consider to be like information that you might necessarily want to have. It could be very dangerous, but I just thought that from top to bottom, this shrine was working for me, and I understood how it would work, and I understood how I would use it in my games.
Yeah, I am very fond of that opening text as well. Stephen, you've managed to do a really, really hard thing, which is tell like a really interesting and beautiful little story in quite a small amount of words. And so I love that. I'm particularly struck by that image of the blue candle and the hair skull. I don't know if you noticed or not, Stephen, but I made your keeper name that.
Yeah, I definitely noticed.
So that I loved that. I think mechanically the move, the item, and the spell are all great, which is something I always look at. And then I'm with you, David. I could see me using this. It has a dreamlike quality. It has, in a certain way, it has an abstract quality. But unlike some of the other shrines we got that had like a similar sort of more esoteric or abstract approach, this one feels a lot like really usable, right?
Yeah,
I think that's key.
Yeah, you can have an abstract aesthetic all day long, but when rubber needs to meet the road at some point, and this does a great job.
It's got to be functional, yeah. And this is like highly functional, and I think it's the flaws that that you can attach to the item at the shrine. I think that's part of it. A little reminiscent of the ritual, actually. I really quite love the one where you have to like concentrate to keep it in this plane of existence. That's just such a good touch. Just sort of both in terms of the play and as well as like the sort of the visual of that, or the sort of the fiction of that is really fun. I think it's great. It's consistent all the way through, very thematically consistent.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Stephen, what was your inspiration for this?
I can't really say. I think that I was trying to, my initial drafts for shrines were all these kind of visceral Cronenberg body horror things, and then it just wasn't really.
I love that too.
Sure, well, I do too. But it just wasn't really landing for me. And then, I wanted to do something that was actually fairly mechanically simple, and then not really do a lot of exposition in regards to like where this shrine came from, who's this woman that's facilitating this ritual. Just kind of leave that up to the GM. Like, maybe like, can you go get yourself a rabbit skull and some dried wood and do this yourself? Like, I kind of wanted to leave it really open-ended. But yeah, no real inspiration. Just one of those things that, you get a germ of an idea for and comes about in revision.
I like that it wasn't super dark, and I love super dark stuff. Don't get me wrong, but I would say that well more than half of the shrine entries were pretty dark. Like, they were pretty heavy and consequential and a little gross or evil or whatever. Right? There's just a darkness to them, and I like that this one was like fairly. It has that dreamy quality. It has that lighter quality. It has that. It doesn't feel particularly like ideological or like there's nothing like good or evil going on. It's just a sort of thing, and I'm kind of here for that.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by all things dream related. It's a part of human experience that is largely unexplained, so it's perfect for a shrine to be centered around it and bring it into the like reality of Dungeon World.
Yeah. Congratulations on winning the contest.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for participating in the first place.
Sure.
Absolutely. I hope to see some more participation in the future when we have more contests.
Most definitely.
That just leaves one final question. Who's really in control here?
Discern Realities is a production of The Gauntlet. We can be found on our website, gauntlet-rpg.com. We also have a G Plus community. Just go to the community section of G Plus and search for The Gauntlet. If you like what we do, we would love your support on Patreon. It's patreon.com/gauntlet. And we're also on Twitter at GauntletRPG.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, listeners. That's our show.
always do that in Hangouts when I drink something. I go, Mentos, the fresh maker. I'd love someone to pull Mentos out of their adventuring gear to stealth buy something. That would be amazing.
The creature smells something minty fresh.